make weird music. Make weird music!
Chris Opperman is a composer, pianist, music professor, and a gentleman extraordinaire based in New Jersey. And he has a long history of wonderful music, including a couple solo albums. He's worked with Mike Keneally. He played trumpet on the album Dancing with Beer for Dolphins. And he's here with us today to talk about a new piece that he's written as a capstone dissertation music project for his PhD, all the way from New Jersey. So, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I would like to quickly thank the Mason Grove School of the Arts and Gregory Mueller for setting up the studio today and letting us use their space. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's so easy when there's professionals doing this. Cool. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about the Cribbage Variations.
Okay. So I was doing research for the paper portion of my dissertation, which is going to be about Frank Zappa's piece Dupree's Paradise. And I was trying to gain insight into how the 1988 arrangement was built. So fortunate enough to be friends with Scott Tunis, so I emailed him and I said, hey, Scott, how did this arrangement work out? And he wrote back a nice email, and he said that at one point he was walking around listening to Webern's Concerto for 9 Instruments, Opus 24, and wishing that it was a longer work. And he tried to commission the piece from one of the other guys in the band, but he didn't want to do it because he was busy playing cribbage with Mike Keneally on the bus. So I read this email and I laughed a lot because it just seems like such a crazy idea. And then I was like, well, what if I took Webern's tone row and then tried to like smash it into the rules of cribbage? What kind of results would I get? And as things often happen in creative efforts, the piece spiraled kind of completely out of control and became much larger in terms of scope and ambition and length than I had initially intended, and wound up being sufficient for the musical portion of my PhD in music composition. So that was a pretty nice surprise, and kind of cool that it spun out from the other part of the research that I was doing.
Yeah, that's super cool. And you're premiering the piece next month in November, right?
Yep, Sunday, November 19th at Shindall Hall, which is upstairs here from the studio, and it's free, and the performers will be a Helix, which is a new music ensemble here at Rutgers. They're really doing a great job. The conductor, Kynan Johns, he conducts a lot of Mahler and a lot of operas around the world. He's a really world-class conductor, and he's very excited about the piece, so that makes me feel very honored that he's conducting it.
And the piece itself has some very challenging aspects. I was listening to your rough mix last night, and there's a lot of passing of short motifs between groups of instruments. How have the rehearsals gone, and what are some of the challenges they've faced?
The rehearsals have gone pretty well. Obviously, some of the challenges are their syncopated rhythms and everything, and just the sheer number of notes at certain parts. The interesting thing is the parts they're having trouble with are actually the parts where there's a lot of space. So they have a lot of really fast, like ba-da ba ba-da-da ba-da ba ba-da, like passages, and then they have like ba-da ba-da-da-da ba, like that kind of motifs. So kind of coordinating when they suddenly have space has been kind of a challenge. And the other thing that's been challenging is that when I was approaching the work, musicologist Martha Hyde wrote an article about Stravinsky's neoclassical works and talked about how they kind of operate. And one thing she talked about was he had a thing called what she called eclectic imitation, where you would have these all asynchronous or atemporaneous musical ideas, and they would just kind of get shoved together. So that kind of operates in this piece where you'll have 1 second you'll be in a kind of like early 20th century kind of paradigm, and then the next second channeling more like Wagner or Liszt. So those kind of like sudden stylistic shifts between the variations, I think, are kind of tough because it's not just like and not just playing the notes. It's like your performance practice has to suddenly change from one variation to the next one. But they're doing a really great job, so that's not a criticism of their hard work.
No. It's legitimately challenging. As I was listening through last night, I just imagined trying to perform this as an ensemble. I love the piece. It is very stylistically diverse. How many movements, and can you tell us about some of the methodology you went through, or some of your thoughts as you were assembling the different movements in different genres?
Sure, absolutely. So there are 15 movements because 15 is the kind of magic number in cribbage. I don't know if you've ever played cribbage, but
I love cribbage.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
So 15 and 31 are the two most important numbers, but 15s happen all the time, and 31s happen every once in a while. So first I built the matrix that I would know all 144 possible combinations of the row, and then I built a rhythm table for unique integers that equal 15, so that if I wanted to pull like different syncopated rhythms, I could pull them, they equal 15. So some of my goals when I was working on the piece, the first thing is that a lot of times people will dismiss 12-tone music or 12-tone serialism as just math music or not interesting or that kind of stuff. So whenever I approach something like this, I always want it to be musical. So the most important thing to me is that it be a functioning work of music. So I wouldn't go to someone working in a tonal paradigm and be like, well, your song is just all 1-4-5s. That's like super lame. So I feel like the same kind of thing is operating here. So a good craftsman, any tools in the hands of a good craftsman should provide a sufficient result. Hopefully it doesn't sound too arrogant. I think I sound really arrogant right now. Okay.
No, not at all. I think it's super cool, and our audience is probably the perfect audience for this.
Yeah. So, for instance, there's a couple ones that are easy to find. So the first one of streets and spillikins, the streets and the spillikins. So the streets are, when you have a cribbage board, the streets are where the pegs go, and the spillikins are the pegs themselves, for those who don't know. So it starts with the trombone, and the trombone plays the prime zero version of the row and has exactly 15 attacks, while it's accompanied with the rest of the thing. So a lot of 12-tone works start that way, where you get a statement of the first row kind of unabashedly, so that you could see that the rest of the music spins out from that. And I felt like that would be really helpful to any listener, so we did that. The third movement is the first one that kind of addresses directly the Zappa connection with the 1988 band. So some of the challenges you face when you're working on a 12-tone piece is, one of them is that maybe you don't want like noise all the time, or you're not trying, like, so chromatic saturation was something that Webern and Schoenberg and Berg were trying to achieve, or Milton Babbitt in their works. I don't feel a need to, like, I feel like that's been done really well and excellently, so I didn't feel a need to be all chromatic saturation all the time. So I tried to find ways to not be all chromatically saturated all the time. Does that make sense?
I think so. During those sections, I never felt that unpleasantness that I've normally felt listening to the 12-tone music. So I was really interested to hear about how you approach that, because it is so musical and approachable. It's something that I feel is much more accessible than a lot of other 12-tone music I've heard.
And that was partially by design. I know there are some philosophies in music where the audience liking it is lame or something, but I kind of feel like I want the people on the journey with me to be part of the journey with me, and so that I kind of really important. So
Yeah.
one thing you can do with the 12-tone matrix is that you can combine rows to create different effects. So if I wanted a series of chords, then all I had to do was have 12 of them. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I could pick I'll just pick it at random. I could pick something like this. Okay, so here I have A, D, E flat, and G. All right, so then I would just pick the corresponding notes on the matrix that start off the row. So I could pick P, P8, P3, P4, and where's A? Where are you hiding? P10. And then I could make a chord progression by going through the row that way. So I was actually very strict about how the piece was constructed. So I had a series of rules. So one of the rules was that all the row statements must be complete row statements. Because as an analyst, it's not fun when you're analyzing a piece and then the composer decides, well, I just like this note better, I'm just going to use this note. So I wanted it to be like super strict. You'll find everything if you're looking for it. The other one was that I could repeat pitches in the row as long as I go back and then complete the row. So I have a phrase that goes, okay? So there were notes that repeated there, but whenever I repeated, I then continued the row. So you do get a complete row statement. And also that made it possible to have 15 coinciding with 12 because it would be really hard to do if I wasn't repeating any pitches whatsoever.
This is fascinating. This is so cool.
Oh, thank you so much. So the fourth movement, a mid-December breeze, I might call it a mid-December winds because they're played by woodwinds. That seems really obvious. I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier. But so Messiaen was a composer in the mid-20th century who tried to bring back some kind of like Renaissance or medieval techniques when it came in terms of like rhythm and stuff. And he wrote a book called The Technique of My Musical Language where he literally tells you how to write like him, which is pretty cool, actually. So the idea of a rhythmic quartet. So the way it works is you have these two aspects, the rhythm and the pitches or the melody, that are of different numbers, different numerical values. So you have the talia, which is the rhythm, and then you have the color, which is the number of pitches. So in this case, the number of pitches obviously is 12, and the number of rhythms is 15. So in the fourth movement, what I did was I made a canon out of it. So the flute starts off, it goes, and then the oboe player comes in with a different one. Okay. So the notes will go through 12 and then repeat every 12 times, and the rhythm will repeat every 15 pitches, so that they wind up kind of like having a canon. You wind up with all the possible permutations in the rhythm, which obviously I didn't do all of them. The piece would be super long. But then the three of them go together in kind of a canon. So a lot of times in composition, you're trying to think about how to make multiple lines move at the same time. So in a lot of rock and pop music, we have lines that don't move. They'll move together. Right? So they'll have like harmonies that are homorhythmic with itself. So, I find contrapuntal writing really interesting. So this is a way I could generate contrapuntal music in a mathematical process in a way that also was satisfying. So a lot of times these things were trial and error. Like I would try different rows, and they would either be too dissonant, or they would not be interesting enough, or they wouldn't fit mathematically, and then I'd have to find a different combination of stuff that would work the way I wanted it to.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I've heard the term aleatoric composition.
Okay.
Is that what you're doing? Is it kind of like rolling a dice and then you you pick notes and chords and go from there, or is this a different kind of systematic method, or is this based on the rules that you're inventing?
So this piece is based on all the rules that I'm inventing. The last piece I did for the Meraki Chamber Ensemble, it was a flute, clarinet, and cello piece. And that piece is entirely aleatorically generated, where I sat there with dice and rolled them. Oh, but what I learned from that process, or the reason why I do these things, is when I'm talking in the classroom to my students, I want to have the authority of someone who's actually done the homework of actually writing in these styles. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like I felt like I could learn things intrinsically from the process of doing that I could never get from a book. So that's why I did them. So what I learned from the aleatoric piece was that the composer has an awful lot of control because the composer is determining the definition of the processes. So if in one movement I'm rolling, I got the musician's dice that are 12-sided die that have note pitches on them because I'm a super nerd, right? And then I do 20s because I'm also a super nerd. So I would roll the pitch and then I'd roll the D20. I'd be like, okay, well, the flute's going to play 13/16 notes on A flat, right? Um, but then there were different processes involved there. But the aleatoric stuff, actually, the composer has a lot more control than it sounds like at face value. And the same thing here with the 12-tone matrix and that kind of stuff. Like the composer is determining the processes and therefore is defining what the work is going to sound like. So one of these processes, this is actually a really good segue. This is a really good segue. One of these processes is an idea called a time point system that was invented by Milton Babbitt when he was at Princeton. And the way it works is you have a bar of 3/4, and you have your 12-tone row, and then the position where the pitch goes is based chromatically on the 16th note. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? So if my row starts with the B, then on the very last 16th note, I'm going to have a B. Does that make sense? So I thought, gee, I wonder what would happen if I ran all 12 versions of the prime row at the same time with Milton Babbitt's time point system. Now, sometimes in science or in math or in anything you're doing, you will discover that you are dumb. So the result of this process, which should have been totally predictable, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, it's going to sound so cool. Like, this is so out there. And then I play it back, and what do I hear? Oh, sorry, that was terrible. Let me try that again. Like, of course I'm hearing all 12 pitches every beat because I'm using all 12 rows. But it was so funny and so dumb that I kept it. I mean, it's not, the piano's going, they're all in different registers, but it has this effect where it sounds like there's a chromatic scale going up that never ends. But it was so funny and I was so dumb that I was like, okay, well, I'm going to celebrate my stupidity by keeping this. Because sometimes, things should just be funny. I mean, I know new music's supposed to be real serious and classical music's supposed to be very, very serious, but sometimes I don't want to be real serious,
Absolutely, right. I interviewed Frank Pesci, who's a modern opera composer, and then Hyun-Ki Ju from Igudisman and Ju, and they both talked about like the idea that we shouldn't be so somber and serious, and that music only became that way in the last 100 years or so, 120 years. So I totally agree. I loved this piece, and I laughed at certain parts, and it's just such a fun thing to listen to, and very emotional. I was surprised at the emotionality, not because I don't think you do that, but because it just was unexpected after certain parts. Like the 12-tone stuff is usually hard to listen to, but I found myself really liking it. And then it would go into some sort of really kind of quiet, sensitive, beautiful section, and then you'd really build up from there, and you were using space and dynamics. I just loved it. And it was all MIDI, so I'm like, this is going to be awesome when a real orchestra plays this.
Oh yeah, it's insane. The rehearsal, I'm like, wow, this sounds really good in real life.
Yeah.
And the piano, you can hear the piano really well, which is so one of the orchestrational things. I'm used to working with large orchestras. So suddenly I only have 9 people, but I kept, I kind of kept that in my mind. So the piano, I kept thinking it was going to be quiet. And then we get to rehearsal, and the piano's like really loud, and I'm like, hooray, I can hear the piano, So really nice.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your kind words.
Oh, it's a great piece, man. I'm really, I'm excited to even have this conversation and to share it with the world, but also to say congratulations on finishing your PhD. I think that's incredible.
Well, I have to defend and celebrate a paper, but this part is finished, so my advisor was like, "Good job." So that's good. So number 7, so yeah, like for example, the 7th movement is a full-on Lisztian romantic double string work. You know what I mean? So you come out of this like kind of like crazy thing, and then all of a sudden it's like. Kind of stuff. So it's good contrast. And sometimes the variations are actually variations on other works that are not not Opus 24, because I also thought about like what is a variation, like so I'm doing these variations on this row, but also variations on other pieces. Does that make sense? And also at first I wasn't going to tell anybody what the row was from. And then we had like a demo performance, and one of the musicology professors here, Douglas Johnson, just walked right up to me and he goes, Opus 24. And I'm like, wow, that's totally insane and also correct. And now that game is done because you already won the game. So
That's
good
cool.
job, Dr. Johnson. Okay.
2 points for him.
Yeah, 100 points for him. I think that's insane.
I guess he wins cribbage, yeah.
Yeah. He wins cribbage. So some of the other challenges would be when I would have there's a brass trio, and I wanted it to be really kind of regal and not crunchy. You know what I mean? So you had to find rows where you could make them move at different times so that they would coordinate into things that were almost like tonal harmony.
Do you have an example of that you can play?
I can attempt to play.
Sure.
All right, here we go. So you hear how the 3 parts are moving at different times. It's so that I can continue the triadic harmony within the confines of the row construct.
It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. That took a long time. And then there's another movement. The next one is called Lun, and that one really makes good use of the rhythm table. And it's all a syncopated rhythm, so it's like. But they're all harmonized, obviously. This one's dedicated to Doug Lunn, who was my friend and a bass player, and I heard about his passing in the middle of writing this movement.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And you can actually hear the moment where I find out, because it happens at bar 283. Suddenly there's this big 2D, big emotional outpouring. It's just kind of like, wow, my friend died. This sucks. And I wanted I was already at the computer. I wanted to pay tribute to him, and I know he was really good friends with Keneally, and like he was just a wonderful guy, and it was really kind of sad. So I wanted to celebrate him also.
That's great.
The 11th movement is the most difficult one. That one is called Muggins. So Anthony, why don't you explain what Muggins is?
Oh, geez. I don't remember.
Okay.
I've played a lot of cribbage, but it's infrequent. I don't remember Muggins.
So when you forget to score.
That's right. You lose points, right?
You lose points, and your opponent gains points, and they call Muggins on you. It's kind of like if you didn't call Uno or something. So here I tried to. I had this other piece called the Fermi Paradox that we played at LPR a couple years ago, and I had this kind of technique that I was calling alien bebop, where like you would have this kind of rhythm, so it's kind of like right, but it was all kind of harmonized, and I liked the technique that I did, but it was all harmonized the same. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I had 5 instruments on it, but they're all playing the same texture. Not texture, but like same chord voicings. So they go ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da-ba. So I was like, what's a leveled up version of that? Like, how can I take that technique and bring it up? So while I was researching Dupree's Paradise, I came across some information about what Frank Zappa used called a chord Bible, where he had a series of chords that he liked to hear in succession, but they were just chord flavors. So you had like a 6-note version or 7-note versions, and then in his orchestral works from the late 70s to the early 80s, thanks Brett Clement for doing all this research, he could use that to generate material that was kind of logical, and it sounded logical, but it wasn't necessarily apparent where it was coming from. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So what I wanted to do here was a similar thing. So I thought of chord voicings that I liked, and then I knew at any point I could change them as long as I had 12. So
Yeah.
I could change the way that the voices were structured. And then that happens with a lot of notes. So here I used 143 of the possible 144 combinations of the 12-tone row, and I forgot one.
Ooh, cliffhanger?
Yeah, cliffhanger. I'm really like, I'm a big nerd right now. Okay. So I forgot one, and that's why there's one missing. And I will let all of you analysts out there in the audience study the score and figure out which one is missing. This one is way too hard for me to even try to hack through on the piano, so you'll have to come to the concert and hear it.
All right.
But what is good, I can play the very last note. So I set it up so they would all end on the same note, which is G. Right? Because, I was also like, oh my God, there's so many notes. I just want one note. Okay, the note is G. I'm going to reverse engineer it so it lands that way.
Very cool.
And then you get the solo piano variation called the 144,000. One thing I want to mention that I actually think is really important is that in most of my pieces, like the Porpentine or the 22nd Overture, or those kind of like big works, I don't write them in chronological order, right? So I'll be working on one section. So for instance, I had this pretty early on. Like that was an idea I had before I had the like, that kind of stuff, right? So one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to write the Cribbage Variations in chronological order based on the ideas and when I had them. So this is the first kind of big piece of mine where you get all my ideas in order. I just felt like that'd be interesting to me. I don't know who cares about that shit. But oops, sorry. I don't know who cares about that stuff. But just a little trivia. All right, so this movement I can actually play for you because I wrote it on the piano. So. Winner, winner, lucky dinner.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you. Don't put that comment in.
Of course I'm going to put that in. The best stuff is what the artists don't want in the interview.
So when I was recording the Porpentine, there was this lick in there that I budgeted like, I don't know, like half an hour to play this one lick. And I nailed it the first time and I was so excited. I was like, yeah, like yelled in the microphone. And the engineer was like, you can't do that, right? And I was like, no.
That's funny. There were some parts in the Cribbage Variations that very strongly reminded me of the band Henry Cow, and I didn't know if you ever listened to them. No, okay.
My nerd cred is going down by the second.
It's probably very a lot of similar influences, modern composers and whatnot. And then secondly, I wanted to know what kind of a role did improvisation play in the assembly of these variations?
So the piece that I just played for you, that one is the most improvisatory, meaning that I sat at the piano and kind of like felt it out from different rows. But this piece is almost entirely generated through pre-compositional methods. The other movement that has kind of an improvisational nature is the very last one, which, I don't want to spoil a surprise for people because I think it's a pretty good trick, so I don't want to play any of that. But
Okay.
it's got a surprise ending.
All right. Chris, thank you so much again. For people who have never listened to your music, where can they find it, and where would you prefer they buy it?
Oh, buying it would be awesome. I really prefer that a lot. You can buy everything on iTunes, but you can listen to it for free on Spotify. Composers in the 21st century, like, we're happy if you're listening to our music. It's there to be listened to. So really, I'd be happy if you're just listening. That's really great. I have some unreleased stuff on my SoundCloud. So there's a piece called Ariadne that was played by the Montclair State University Orchestra. You can hear that there, and you can hear a piece called Kagemusha, which is written for the Berkeley Symphonic Winds. There are no studio recordings of those pieces, so it's a nice place to hear stuff. But I'm real friendly. Say hi on Facebook. You can just add me. I'll add you back. And I really appreciate you guys watching this interview.
Do you have a website URL to share?
Yeah, it's chrisopperman.net, but I haven't updated it in a long time.
Okay, and then remind us of the details of the performance of the Cribbage Variations.
Okay, it's going to be on Sunday, November 19th at 7 p.m. in Shindall Hall, which is on the first floor of the Mason Gross New Music Building. And it's going to be performed by Helix, conducted by Kynan Johns, and performed by 9 fabulously talented students of music.
Chris, thank you so much for your time, and another preemptive congratulations on the completion of your PhD. And I think that there's a lot more to dig into with some of your previous work, so we should probably do this again in the next couple months.
I would really enjoy that. And I have a little surprise for you.
Uh-oh.
So, make weird music. What I like about the name is it's a command.
Yes,
Make weird music. So I'm going to make you a jingle right now for your
sweet.
website. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Make weird music. Make weird music. That is your new jingle. Congratulations.
Was that pre-composed?
No. Yes. Greg is nodding yes.
Thank you. We are going to open the interview with that, and we may open other videos with that. Feel free to send as many of those over as you wish, by the way.
No problem.